Welcome. George Bernard Shaw once said that England and America are two countries separated by a common language. Hello, my name's Paul and this is Barebones Tech. Those of you who listen closely may have noticed that I'm English. I was born in England, a country that's part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which is located just off the coast of France in Europe. That means I speak English, and I claim a certain authority on its use. I've spoken it since birth, it's my first language. However, I live in the United States, specifically in Indiana. And so I have seen firsthand the differences between the United Kingdom and the United States versions of the language and some of the other cultural differences. And I believe that most of my audience are located in one of those two countries as well. And so there may be some confusion when I use particular terminology and so on. And that's what this video is about. This video is intended to be a little bit light-hearted, so please don't take offense. And as I've already indicated, it's focused very much on the differences between British English, proper English, and the strange version that they speak over here in the United States. I am well aware that there are other English-speaking nations in the world, but I can't speak with any kind of authority as to how they address some of these issues. But if you are from one of those countries and you wish to comment, feel free to do so. It might be interesting to see how these differences pan out in, as I say, other countries that speak English. The differences fall into 6 categories. The first, pronunciation. There are many words that are pronounced differently either side of the Atlantic, or the pond as we refer to it. An example that many of us are familiar with is tomato in England is a tomato in America. Arguably, I kind of have to give this one to the Americans because we don't say potato in England, we say potato. So we're perhaps the ones that are inconsistent there. Then there are words that have letters dropped. Herbs. There's an H at the beginning, guys. Moving on to the subject material though for this channel. Numbers. The way we say numbers is actually different, very slightly, in that in England we often insert the word and. So we would say 123, whereas I've noticed in America, most people say 123. Then we have the abbreviation for the word mathematics. There's an S at the end, so we call it maths, not math. Sounds a bit stunted to me, but there you go. Getting more technical, and this is one that causes discussion quite often in my day job, is the piece of computer equipment that is used to direct network traffic across the internet and within an intranet and across a local area network. It's pronounced router. A router looks like this. It's a tool that cuts holes in bits of wood. It's derived from the word rout, which is basically when one army decimates another, as opposed to a route, which is how you get from point A to point B. Now, I'm sure many of you right now are reaching for the comments and hitting that keyboard to argue with me on this one, and feel free to do so, but please keep it respectful. But I will point one thing out to you before you do. That great musician, a true American, one of the founders of rock and roll, the late great Chuck Berry, did not sing about getting your kicks on Route 66. Go and listen to it. Joking aside, for the most part I will use English pronunciations, not American ones. Apart from the fact it's what I'm used to, I just think that American pronunciations with an English accent just sound weird. 2. Spelling. Unless you live under a rock, you're probably familiar with some words that are spelt differently between the English version of the language and the American version of the language. The most obvious example is the Americans dropping the letter U out of words like colour. There are a few other examples though. A flat circular object is a disc. Or is it a disc? Then we have television and computer applications, which we call programs. And when we create them, we say that we are programming. To program. But in England versus America. Now, due to the fact that America's got Silicon Valley and pretty much American universities and American computer sciences and so on have created the modern programming languages and, well, most of what we're currently using, it does mean that where these words come into play is often actually inside the computer's configuration. The word color is a good example. If you were to look at how an HTML web page is structured, the word color is in there, and they use the American spelling because, well, they do. So for the most part, I'm afraid, sorry fellow English people, I'm going to have to go with the American spelling most of the time for that reason. Number 3, notation. When we first arrived in the United States, my older kids, who were already in their high school age, had to undergo a series of tests administered by the school district to determine where they should be placed within the American school system. And when they took their maths tests, they underperformed based on their abilities. And part of the reason for that was a difference in the notation. The way that Americans present calculations is actually different from the way they're taught in England. And it wasn't they didn't understand how to do the calculations, they just didn't understand the notation. What am I talking about? Well, there are 5 different ways of writing down or referring to a multiplication. The first is, and I should point out, all of these are used the world over. Okay, so please don't reach for the comments and say, but in England we use that, or in America we say that. They are all used the world over. It's more to do with which ones are more popular. So the first one is the use of the word of, as in half of 6. Half of 6 actually means half multiplied by 6 or 3. So of is multiplication. The second one I refer to as adjacency. In mathematics, particularly in algebra, if we write 2 quantities or 2 values next to each other, we mean they're multiplied together. For example, 2b means 2 times b. And that works fine with algebra. The problem is it doesn't work with arithmetic, because if I was to put, for example, 3, 4, does that mean 34 or 3 times 4? 12. So adjacency works for algebra, but not for arithmetic. But you kind of probably knew that already. We then have one, and this is the one that caused the problems for my offspring, the dot notation. Sometimes multiplication can be represented by a dot. So I could put 2.3 like this, which means 6. Now the problem with that notation, and this is common in America, but the problem with that notation is it's easily confused with a decimal point. Certainly in England, the decimal point is often placed in the middle of the letters like that, so that would actually be 2.3 in England. In America, they put the decimal point on the line like this, but that's very easy to get moved around, and so I'm not a fan of that notation. Number 4, the cross. This is the English way of doing things. However, it doesn't come without its difficulties, of course. The problem with using a cross is it looks like an X, and an X is often used in algebra, so how do you know whether it's an X or a cross? So you end up having to use a very stylized X so that it's not confused with the cross for multiplication. 5th option, the asterisk. Now, this one really came about with the development of computer languages, because they needed a symbol for multiplication and they wanted something fairly unique. And so the star or the asterisk is typically used to mean multiplication on computers or in computer languages. I don't know why they chose it. In some ways it's like a very big dot, pleases the Americans. In other ways it's a cross on amphetamines, pleases the British. For whatever reason they chose that, and that is the 5th way in which multiplication can be expressed. On this channel I'm going to try to be consistent, so if I'm working in algebra, I'll use adjacency because that's pretty common. If I'm doing arithmetic, I'll use the cross because that's what I'm familiar with, and I feel it's clearer than the dot. And obviously in programming languages, I'll be using the asterisk. Number 4, standards. A lot of things get standardized within a country, but not all countries follow the same standards. A good example of this is mains electricity. If we look at a electrical plug in America, that is expecting power to be provided at 120 volts, 60 hertz AC. Whereas if you go to the UK, you would expect your power to be 230 volts at 50 hertz AC. By the way, it is 230 now, not 240, because Europe standardized it all. In England, it used to be 240 volts. It's now 230, which is why everyone's kettles take a little bit longer to boil than they used to. But anyway, I digress. So the point is, I'm in the United States, and that means that if I'm developing some electronic equipment that is based on mains power and has calculations that to do with the frequency or anything else, remember I'm here in the US, so my circuits and my circuit diagrams are going to be based on the US standards. Another one that throws a lot of people off is measurements. Most of the world these days has gone metric. A notable exception to that, though, is the United States, where things are still measured in pounds and ounces and gallons and pints and inches and feet and so on. Interestingly, the United Kingdom actually just can't make up their mind and use this crazy kind of hybrid system between them both. So for example, for anyone that's not in the UK, just so that you know, if you're driving a vehicle, your speed is measured in miles per hour, but you fill up your fuel tank with litres. But when you go to the bar, you buy a pint of beer. And that's another thing just to be aware of. A pint in the United Kingdom is 20 fluid ounces. In the United States, they can't even use the same pint. They have 16 fluid ounces in a pint, which always makes me feel a little short-changed when I go to the pub. Now, again, there have been many arguments about the benefits of metric versus imperial, and you know, yes, we use a decimal system for calculation for the most part, and when we do that, typically the metric system makes more sense. But I would encourage you to go and watch my video on counting methods and number bases, and you'll realize that actually the imperial system doesn't suck as badly as you'd first think. It does have certain merits, it does have certain benefits. What about on this channel? Well, wherever possible, I'll try and do both. I might say 1/2 inch, 10 millimeters, or whatever the equivalent is. Number 5, different words for the same thing. Now again, most of us are probably familiar with the most common one, which is that cars in the UK have bonnets and boots, and in the US they have hoods and trunks. That's a trivial one. But there are some that spill over into the subject area of this channel. These things. In England, or in the United Kingdom, we pretty much call all of them brackets. We'd refer to round brackets, square brackets, curly brackets, and triangular brackets, but they're all brackets. In the United States, they each have a unique name. These are parentheses, these are brackets, these are braces, these are chevrons. Now in this case, I actually again have to side with the Americans. I like the idea that there is a different name for a different thing. Just calling them all brackets makes life very difficult, mathematically speaking and programmatically speaking. So you will probably find me, for the most part, referring to them as parentheses or chevrons or braces or whatever. So we've got different spellings of the same word. We've got different pronunciations for the same word. We've got different words for the same thing. The final one, number 6, is different meanings for the same word. The main one I want to address here is the word billion. Now, there's quite a long and interesting story behind the meaning of the word billion, and the Numberphile channel did a really good video on it. I'll link it below. Okay, but the word billion in America means 1,000 million. And that means a trillion is 1,000 billion. And a quadrillion is 1,000 trillion, and it goes on, okay? And the rest of the English-speaking world now pretty much follows that standard. The last holdout was the United Kingdom, who officially changed to that standard in 1974. But what about the non-English speaking world, and what did the United Kingdom and other people call a billion? You know, what is a billion before that? Well, the answer is that a billion in Old English or in non-English speaking countries is a million. In other words, what the Americans call a trillion is actually a billion. It's called long form. The American version is referred to as short form. If you really explore the background to it, and as I say, the Numberphile channel did a really good one on this, the long form, the non-English and pre-1974 Britain version, where a billion is a million, actually makes more sense. It's more logical. But unfortunately, that is not what we now use in the English-speaking world. We need to be clear and precise. I believe there's been a few cases with NASA where they've fallen into this kind of trap where they haven't specified things using the same terminology, and we've had Mars rovers that didn't work, and we've had explosions on the launch pad, and we've had, you know, even the Apollo 13 disaster was down to a miscommunication of specifications. It's important that we're accurate about this, and for that reason I try to avoid using words like billion and million. I'm going to use this kind of thing. So if I want to talk about 2 million, it's much easier to say 2 times 10 to the power 6. That's 2 with 6 noughts on the end. Okay, and then this, which is a US billion, is just 10 to the power 9. And this, which is a US trillion and an old British billion, is 2 to the power 12. And that way it's accurate. So that's what I intend to do here. And that's it. Those are the main areas of difference. I'm sure more will crop up as the videos develop, and I'm sure that I'm going to spark some conversation from people who have very, very strong opinions one way or the other. But please remember, as I said, my intention here is not to offend anybody, but to simply clarify the language for everybody to ensure we're all talking about the same thing. Anyway, if you like this, like what you've seen, and you're interested in seeing more, you know the drill by now, or you should do. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, comment, obviously, share the video with your friends, really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Once again, my name's Paul, this has been Barebones Tech, thank you for watching.